Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mary O'Connell. I'm the 3PL freight broker expert here at FreightWaves and I'm happy to present this webinar in partnership with G3 Logistics. Today we will discuss the latest challenges and share strategies to strengthen your supply chain. We will also have a live Q&A following the discussion, so make sure to have your questions ready for our presenters. Before we get started, I'd like to cover just a few housekeeping items. First, if you have any issues during the webinar, please feel free to reach out via the audience chat in your webinar console. If you have any questions that you would like to ask our presenters, please enter those through the Q&A box in your console as well. We will answer as many of those as possible during the live audience Q&A following the discussion. We will also be sending a link of this recording of the webinar tomorrow if you'd like to view it on demand or share it with your colleagues. At this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jonathan for introductions and to kick off today's discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great day. We're looking forward to having a great conversation with you. By quick background, my name's Jonathan Hanak. I'm a partner at EY, focusing on the transportation, logistics, and industrial space. Looking forward to a great conversation today. Nicole?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Ostertag. I lead G3 Logistics Solution and Strategy Team. Our primary responsibilities are strategic planning for growth, service offerings and market positioning, as well as long-term planning for innovation and technology integration. And then I also lead the development of custom logistics solutions, supply chain analytics, and then transportation and warehouse network design efforts. Before that at G3, I led a number of different operations and customer service teams. And before that, I spent nearly a decade at Union Pacific Railroad. So looking forward to trying to share my little piece of the logistics world with you all today.
Adam? Yeah, and I think that leaves me. Thanks, Nicole. So, hey, everybody, my name's Adam Cooper. I'm a partner at EY. I'm responsible for our manufacturing business, which sits within our supply chain competency. And I really focus on helping clients drive value out of manufacturing operations, whether it's related to structural costs, throughput, yield, overall improvement in operations as companies look forward. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Well, I'll MC the conversation a little bit, and this conversation will be a bit, of a dialogue back and forth. And the main topic that we want to cover today is the disruptions across the supply chain, really at the intersection of make manufacturing and deliver on, down to distribution to final mile and into the supply chain. It's an incredibly volatile time, which I don't have to tell anyone that's on the call today. It's forces across the entire system, from geopolitical, commodity, economic volatility, and trade. And what we'll spend the majority of the hour on is talking about these trends that we're seeing, what we see as implications of the forces, both to manufacturing, the make side of the supply chain, and to delivery. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about both the mitigation strategies that we see many of our clients and partners taking, companies out in the sector like yourself, as well as the opportunities that many of these disruptions represent. There are technology and forces that allow each of you to create competitive advantages in the moment when the world's moving a little bit underneath all of our feet. Finally, just as a connectivity thread, we are going to link between manufacturing and deliver, because any activity that happens in one impacts the other, and vice versa. And so Adam is going to guide a lot on make manufacturing processes. Nicole's going to guide a lot on delivery and logistics, and there'll be a bit of a handshake between the two of those. So we'll get right into it. As Mary mentioned, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring as we go along. We do have time for Q&A at the end, but we'll engage on conversations in the interim to the extent that it's helpful to the audience. Adam, why don't I turn it to you to start talking a bit about manufacturing opportunities?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jonathan. So you guys, what we're seeing our clients ask us about really kind of can fall into these three buckets in terms of challenges that they're facing or areas that they like a perspective on. So the first is really around what's happening geopolitically or on a global scale. If we think about things like tariffs and the shifting in trade stance, if we think about things actually like conflict and war, those are top of mind for a lot of companies as companies are trying to set strategies around how can they navigate some of what's happening. The second area that we see, and we field a lot of questions about and we engage with a lot of clients on, is related to kind of talent. And then what is the resulting downstream impact of the talent shortage that exists in manufacturing today? There's more than 2 million jobs that are going to be open in manufacturing. There's a belief that going forward, irrespective of what happens in the United States with regards to immigration or other regions, there will continue to be a talent shortage. And then what is the resulting impact of that talent shortage? How does that talent shortage create risk? And then what can be done to mitigate that risk and address some of the talent shortages? And then the last piece of this that we spend a lot of time working on is the opportunity that technology is providing, as well as the potential threat that technology is providing. And that's a double-sided coin, because on the one hand, there is all sorts of value creation potential kind of that's coming every day as new technologies are released and new capabilities are deployed, as you know, whether it relates to more traditional technology or some of the more emerging technologies that kind of fall into the AI space. But on the flip side, there's a competitive risk associated with that if your company isn't in a position to take advantage of that technology as quickly as your competitors. And so trying to balance the challenge as well as the opportunity from technology is a real issue for many manufacturers today. And one of the things that we're seeing is, depending on where companies are in the maturity scale, there are some indicators around who's going to end up leading and winning in this space and who's going to end up falling behind. And so the first piece of this is companies that are really rigid in their construct in terms of how they produce, where they produce, the operating models that they use, their labor structures. Those companies are going to struggle compared to their competitors that have built in some ability to respond and be more agile in terms of how they think about where they produce, what they produce, and what their cost structure looks like. Another kind of indicator that we see leaders really focusing on is the role of talent and how they're investing in their people. There's a lot of capital being put into the manufacturing space today. And oftentimes we see that leading companies are spending significant amounts of that capital on thinking about their workforce and thinking about new skill sets, new operating constructs, so that they're in a position to take advantage of things like the technology that I was just talking about. And again, technology kind of makes up the last two. Everything needs to be more data-driven than it is, right? And there's a recognition with regards to that. But being able to make data-driven decisions really requires new capabilities from your technology stack in the manufacturing space. And a lot of that is traditional and not so cutting edge, right? The concept of integrated real-time data has been around for a long time, but the companies that are doing that well and are able to integrate their different data sources and start to paint a broader picture are the companies that are going to win in the future. And they're also the same companies that are going to be able to take advantage of some of the emerging technology, specifically AI, that's coming to drive efficiency and ultimately drive resilience for some of these challenges that they're facing. So that's a quick snapshot of what some of the pressure is that manufacturers are seeing and how we think companies will be able to win kind of under this environment.
Nicole, as I think about the deliver side of this, you could almost take that same talk track and say there's effects across all of the delivery logistics arm. As manufacturers have strategies around inventory stockpiling or sort of delevering, production lines that come online, speed up, slow down, et cetera. The deliver side has to be highly responsive to that and is impacted by the same forces and a number of others. Would love your perspectives here.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the areas that resonated with me that Adam was talking about is the labor side of that equation, and the big movement right now within logistics to integrate robotics within your warehouse, somewhere within your logistics supply chain. And as we think about how we think that'll be most successful, it's not only that underlying data point that Adam made, but it's also around you're going to need some flexibility in your labor long term, but how do you make that flexible labor easier to insert temporary labor when it's needed, to flex up for something like you mentioned, Jonathan, with the plant adding a new line or ramping up very quickly or slowing down very quickly. And so a strategy that we see a lot of success in is focusing on the routine put away tasks for robotics, for example, or the routine pick tasks, and then having all of that labor structured into smaller areas within the warehouse that are focused on the fine tuning of how do you fit that in a truck, how do you fit that in a rail car, how do you apply dunnage, things that robotics aren't quite there yet on. And that way you are also adding labor that needs to be sophisticated on how do I troubleshoot those robotics? How do I have data scientists in my organization? So it's a shift away from maybe certain other types of labor and into new fields with the technology. But you're also reducing the amount of risk you have in that day-to-day operation of just not being able to do simple tasks when you introduce robotics, for example, into that mix.
Indeed. Perhaps on the sort of...
Go ahead.
Sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
I was going to say, just jumping into the logistics side of the equation, one other additional risk that we didn't touch on the manufacturing side, but I think is essential to both sides of the coin, is really the severe weather aspect of that. And this one is generally at the top of logistics professionals' minds, as they both are frequent and often unpredictable. We were just hearing from Mary about how a tornado hit St. Louis last night, right? And she wasn't expecting that after one already happening just about a week ago in the same metro area. And so these are significantly increasing in frequency, but also, as you can see on the screen here, the economic impact of these disruptions has increased over the same time period as well. And so as I think about things that impact logistics, severe weather has to be at the top of that. And these aren't just always monstrous events. They aren't the hurricane that shuts down the region of a country for months, or a railroad labor strike that backs up cargo and containers for weeks. Many of these disruptions that supply chain professionals are dealing with are everyday disruptions, such as a critical system is out, right? You have an outage today that might only last a few hours, but that's a disruption. Labor calling off your shift, like we were just talking about, that might be a disruption. Or something as simple as a driver accident that seems to happen, right? And so while these large-scale disruptions are ticking up over the past 5 years, those daily disruptors are also ticking up at a more rapid rate. And the biggest difference between those daily disruptors and those large critical events is really that disruption's effect. And so for those daily disruptions, businesses are usually able to get back on track within a matter of hours or even days. And in a large-scale disruption, that duration of that disruption, the resolution of that disruption and the recovery period can often last many months to even years, with that average disruption creating a ripple effect for up to 18 months.
Yeah, when I think about severe weather and the events that are happening, and then navigating the Suez Canal and dock worker strikes on the West Coast and renegotiations. I mean, the sort of feels like it's really difficult to have a very stable supply chain. And then when you add a tariff environment on top of that, where you're sort of not sure with lots of clarity whether you need to accelerate inventory as much as you can or slow it down because of the given rates on a given moment, certainly creates a lot of complexity for supply chain planning and then the execution associated with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the easy example here is the tariff situation where folks ramped up for a date in April. That changed very quickly, and now we're all in a wait and see period, right, ahead of what's happening in July. But even going back a few years, you could take the Russia-Ukraine war, and that disrupted not only rail and road freight in Europe, but also sea freight, as you mentioned, with the Black Sea being heavily restricted, with key ports being shut down. The latest number that I saw was over 300 billion in global trade that was affected. And then rerouting increased by 15 to 25% if you were coming from a lot of those European or even some of the Asian routes as well.
Yeah. And you guys, I'll just add to that, right? On the manufacturing side, we've seen the same thing, right? We've seen, and I'll use raw material stockpiling as an example, right? There was a lot of raw material stockpiling over the last 6, 8, 12 weeks as companies were trying to figure out, hey, how do I understand what this is going to do to my unit cost or my conversion cost metric? Let's make sure we get as much raw material in as we can. And now as a result of that, production schedules are starting to change because companies want to start to work through some of this raw material that maybe they stockpiled too early. And so now they're looking at production schedule break-in, and they're trying to figure out, how do I balance, you know, my plant capacity with my demand forecast to see if I can draw down some of this. So that level of volatility and that level of uncertainty is definitely affecting the make side of the house just as much as it's affecting the logistics deliver side of the house.
Adam, maybe we can start to shift a little bit towards, you know, what do we do? We've got this unstable environment that we're living in. We also have a whole suite of new tools with AI and technology that was really inaccessible to us at the level of capability that was only a few years ago, and really we can say almost a few months ago. And imagine a few months from now we'll be saying the same thing. What do you see in your clients as they're trying to take advantage of improvements in this area?
Yeah, I want to start, Jonathan, with talking a little bit about kind of process standardization, foundational work management processes. And the reason why I want to start here is because if you think about being able to respond, stability is a key component to that, right? And one of the things that we find around a lot of manufacturers regionally and globally is that there is a basic lack of standardized work management processes from facility to facility, site to site, even within sites. And that causes problems in two areas, right? Nicole talked a little bit about robotics and physical automation within the context of warehousing. Well, that applies within the context of production. And one of the key themes that we see is we have a lot of clients talking to us about robotics and opportunities to automate for a number of different reasons. But robots are really good at doing the same thing over and over and over again, right? But if a robot is going to replace multiple people, what you often find is that the process isn't actually stable enough to apply robotics or apply physical automation. And so getting to that standard process is really important to be able to take advantage of some of the automation capabilities that are mature and exist today. And then a second thing, just to tie back to labor, and COVID really brought this out in spades for a lot of manufacturers, which is so much of work management processes today are based on what we would call tribal knowledge, right? And when we saw these significant workforce shifts as a result of COVID, a lot of companies lost the ability to efficiently produce because there wasn't a standard process foundation to build on. And so one of the things that we advise clients on is, as a starting point, irrespective of whether you're trying to drive towards digitization and automation, or if you're trying to drive towards a different cost structure based on your labor profile, you have to make sure that you get your process standardization correct. And you have to make sure that you've got consistency in how work is being executed from a day-to-day basis. And once you drive that consistency into your management system, then you can start to really take advantage of some of the opportunities that exist as it relates to things like digital, things like automation, and really start to set yourself up to be able to better respond to disruptions.
Yeah, and maybe I'll come to you, Nicole, with a thought on this. When we think about standard processes in an environment that has massive volatility, severe weather storms, and other things, how do you, especially on the delivery side, how do you bridge sort of standard processes with the need to be dynamically responsive to goods that move or don't move or need to remove at the same time, and any broader perspectives that you have on the delivery side?
Yeah, it's a good thought, Jonathan. And I would echo what Adam said, is that standard process, lean, right, is a term we hear a lot on both the manufacturing side and logistics, is really the core foundation for having to move as few parts as possible when you do have a disruption. And so I think about standardized work as having most of your eggs in the basket and only having to deal with one or two of those eggs that are maybe now outside of the basket. And I think where you think about standard work, having documented processes is also really important for labor disruptions as well. Being able to say, I've got exactly how I do this task every time the same way from A to Z, written down and trained across your organization, is a very simple but basic concept that can really set up organizations for success when labor is the disruptor. And then to your point, when you have severe weather or something that interrupts one part of that giant network, you're focused on just routine execution across 90 or 95% of your network, and only really having to focus your strategic, your creative thought processing, problem solving efforts on that 5 or 10% of your network that is currently disrupted.
Yeah.
Nicole, and that's where.
Oh, sorry, Jonathan. I was just gonna respond to that. We see the same thing in the manufacturing space with this idea of trying to manage by exception, right? Really kind of get to a point where you've got a level of consistency where you can just drive at those exceptions, which are a small component of what you need to do on a day-to-day basis. So I think the parallel is direct.
There's a preparation in standard processes that are ready to handle exceptions, and which includes both how you set up your supply chain and the partners that you use, right? Choosing to decide what portions you externalize or use to variabilize for complicated factors that impact the delivery and the make side. There are, of course, a whole set of new tools which we alluded to briefly earlier. Love the two of your thoughts on AI and how this is going to have an impact across the supply chain. Some of the things that you're seeing clients and partners executing today, and what the next few years look like.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with what we're seeing in the manufacturing space, Nicole, and then have you react to that. I mean, it's almost hard to put these on a slide, you guys. This environment or this ecosystem is evolving extremely fast, right? This went from years to months to weeks, and now it's almost daily that we're seeing new use cases come to light around different opportunities that exist as it relates to applying what I would call traditional AI, right? And if you think about in the manufacturing space, I mean, there's been basic things you could call AI that go way back, all the way to some of the newest, latest and greatest things around. There was generative AI with ChatGPT and OpenAI that kind of hit the scene last year, and now there's agentic AI in the role of agents, and so. This is moving extremely fast, and most manufacturers are not in a position to really stay front and center with what's going on. But on the flip side, there are so many areas that manufacturers are looking to apply some of these new capabilities, and some of those areas are more traditional areas that you would think of, like maintenance and asset care as an example. That's been one of the kind of the foundation areas where if you can better manage your machines and your asset footprint, you can drive improve throughput and improve asset availability. Another area that we're seeing is in quality control, and there's some really interesting new use cases around how do you look at quality and how do you get to things like batch release by exception, right? Or real-time batch release in certain types of manufacturing. And then there's more coming, right? We're seeing AI really start to be applied into the production scheduling space. And we're seeing it really start to, companies try to think about, hey, how can I really think about my optimization across my production footprint, whether it's optimization of a specific part of a process, but then also the end-to-end process. And again, I'm going to kind of harp on what I was talking about earlier. In order to take advantage of all of this stuff, process standardization really needs to be front and center. And you've also got to have a relatively high level of integration within your technology stack so that you've got the data sources available that you can apply the AI algorithms on top of.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. And I think it actually leads perfectly into the next slide that we have, where you were talking about standard work processes being the foundation for a company's ability to appropriately invest in AI. And I think of a very similar structure for where technology is headed for logistics groups. And that foundation is really critical. The things that are on the left-hand side of the screen here, if an organization doesn't have these things today, they're already behind. These are things like real-time visibility platforms. Where is my load exactly right now, and what's the status of that load? What inventory of this SKU do I have verified in real time at my warehouse at this location? And these are fundamental questions that should be no-brainers at this point. And that's where, if you don't have these things today, those are the easy AI or easy software integrations that you should be putting into your operations. Thinking further down that list there, if a port strike or a railroad labor negotiation or the truck market consolidates again, if these things have taught us anything over the past 5 years, it's that a multimodal, diversified strategy is critical in transportation in today's day and age. And folks that are only executing on one modal plane are limiting themselves from being able to make quick changes when one mode is disrupted or another. And then similarly, every company today needs to have a structured risk management plan, both for operational disruptions and especially for cybersecurity. In today's day of technology, nothing has the ability to ruin a company's supply chain faster than a widespread cyber attack. And cyber attacks account for over a third of the recorded supply chain disruptions every single year. And then finally, this is where I wanted to jump in on your comments, Adam. But if you don't have a really good forecasting tool, you can't take advantage of a lot of the more readily accessible AI on the logistics side of this equation today. And so having a good forecasting tool and the ability to perform predictive analytics against that tool, if you don't have that, you won't have the backbone that's required to use that information to become more proactive against disruptions, which is where that future side of the slide here that's on the screen now is being proactive against those disruptions. And so let's say you have all of these things on the left-hand side, the standard work or the core foundation for technology within the logistics side of the equation. You get an A+ on your current scorecard, but then you need to start thinking about what can I do for the future? What things should I start to think about? What should I be learning about? What should I be investing in now, even if the technology is not all the way there yet, to be prepared for the digital transformation that is rapidly happening, to your comments as well, Adam. And the first thing that I would personally invest in is scenario planning software. And this is where that data and that good forecast play a part in success. A scenario planning software helps companies simulate and analyze the effects of multiple what-if scenarios. And if a disruption occurs, you can model those various solutions to this disruption to get your best case, your worst case scenario, or anything that you want to simulate. And this will help you determine both the operational impact, not only for logistics, but potentially for manufacturing as well,
Sure.
and that financial impact of that disruption. And then really just working your way across, right? Scenario planning software is then a key enabler to the future of logistics technology, which is really under that umbrella of supply chain control towers. And a control tower takes it a step further. It's a cloud-based platform that combines real-time visibility from that foundation, predictive analytics also from the foundation, but then adds decision support, such as the scenario planning software, across your company's supply chain. And it can take a simple problem, such as a delayed truck, for example, and make predictions around what that means for your stock levels. Do you need to expedite a load to make up for the delayed truck, or can you just ride that one out? It's kind of like an air traffic control tower, where it takes various different inputs in from various different systems and then helps them better interact with each other and gives you one spot to view all that information. And then a command center takes it a step further and utilizes AI, as you asked about, Jonathan, and machine learning to say, what is happening in the control tower? And how can I start to make some autonomous decisions for both day-to-day tactical issues or even incident or disruption response? And in that same scenario, the systems decided that maybe you need to expedite more product that's in that delayed truck, and it can connect directly into your purchasing system and execute a replacement STO or PO to fulfill that need. Those portions of the equation are a little bit more conceptual right now. You can't go out and just buy that piece of software, but these are the things that you need to start thinking about so that when that software exists, you're ready to take advantage of it. And then finally, sustainability is only going to become more important in our supply chain, and regulation mandating both reporting and operations will grow in scope as well. And so being able to understand your carbon emission impacts at each part of your supply chain and how your decisions impact those, I think will be really critical to be able to respond to new legislation, new energy formats, how to qualify vendors in the future, and many other tasks.
Yeah, fantastic. At the risk of stating the obvious, all of this sits on top of data that runs across the manufacturing and delivery environment. And so, our clients that are best positioned to take advantage of these and future-proof themselves, as you described, Nicole, have a clean set of data underneath their operations to be able to do things like digitize a digital twin, run different scenarios and simulations, run AI against it. Now we're advantaged in that AI is getting better at taking messy, unstructured data and still making decisions on it. However, there is a requirement to be digitized in order to use these technologies, and that will only be more the case. I'm saying what all of us already know and feel, and I see in many of my clients sort of efforts executing on it, but not fully there. Now that said, there is sort of this view that AI is going to take over all of our jobs and we're not going to be needed anymore. But that's not quite the case yet. We still have to do a little bit of work for a little bit more, and the workforce and the teams underneath our technologies are going to be quite important. Nicole, Adam, welcome your thoughts here on sort of digital workforce, but the role that laborers and humans play in the midst of the environment that we've got.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me okay? I apologize. I just had to make a switch. I'm actually at a manufacturing site today, and as everyone knows, things can be a little variable at times.
Yes, we can hear you just fine, Adam. Yes.
Great. So listen, I'd be remiss in not talking about the role of people, right? And again, when I talked about earlier this idea of kind of winners and losers emerging as companies kind of navigate these different challenges, at the end of the day, people are going to be a critical component to any change that's made, right? We've talked a lot about different tools and data sets, but at the end of the day, there will be decisions that are automated, but people will have to continue to drive decision making. And so it's really important that you guys, whether you're on the logistics side or you're on the make side of the house, really start to think about your workforce as an asset, and really think about how do you empower your workforce and how do you enable your workforce to be as effective as they can possibly be. And so we see that, like I said earlier, right? We see companies starting to really invest in thinking about what are the next generation skills, what are the next generation operating models and roles and job descriptions and accountabilities that are going to be required for kind of a workforce of the future, if you will. And how do I get my people the right tools, right? Like Nicole was talking about, how do we get the right kind of scenario planning so that we can really understand how should we best react to something. How do we make sure that our work management processes that exist aren't just a bunch of transactional work management processes, and how do we take out some of the non-value add steps and really focus our people in the areas that require strategic thought and require value add that can come from a person as opposed to an algorithm, right? And again, go back to the skills. What are those skills? How are we upskilling people, right? We've talked a lot about, and this is something we see at EY, and I see it a lot of my clients. I talked about this idea of generative AI and Chat GPT and Open AI. How do you get people comfortable with relying on these tools to improve the way they operate and drive productivity in their daily work? And then what comes next is going to be this concept of agentic AI and the use of AI agents. And what's the interaction like between your workforce and your AI agent workforce? And then ultimately, how do you stack all of these new responsibilities, these new accountabilities, these new roles into a career path that might look different going forward than a traditional manufacturing career path has looked over the last 5, 10, 15 years? And so being able to think about your workforce as an evolving asset and what role should the workforce play is going to be critical to allowing flexibility and agility and allowing companies to navigate kind of the world that we see, which we don't expect to become more stable, right? We expect things to become less stable as we go forward. And so it's really important to have that underlying people component to go along with the technology and go along with the process piece that we spoke about.
Yeah, I would echo those thoughts, Adam. I think about AI and to your comments about agentic AI, those are, to me, the ways to take out the most simple parts of the equation, right? The routine work that is searching for a load here or a load there, or what happened to this SKU, or retrieving this specific piece of information. And all of those routine, more tactical tasks, if you can remove those from your employees' equation, you can free up their time to think about more strategic problems, right? More interactive or collaborative problems, and use those employees not only more efficiently, but likely more enjoyably for them as well, right? As they get to engage more on those strategic, those problem solving type conversations versus where is my load? And that's what agentic AI is currently good at. And so that's an easy way to bring that into your process. And then tying that back to your comments, Jonathan, obviously having integrations with your suppliers, with the manufacturing and logistics side of the equation within your own business, right? Those are all pretty critical pieces. And I'm sure everyone's heard the term data lake, right? But a data lake is an underlying foundation for a lot of what I spoke about in technology is some type of forum where you can connect all of those different systems, your ERP, your inventory planning, if that's not in your ERP system, your TMS, your WMS, all of those different things need to have one common location to draw that data from to make all of these things that we're talking about the most successful.
I like the way you say that, Nicole. AI takes away the administratively cumbersome parts of our job. Have some clients ask, is AI going to take away our ability to think or our need to think? And in many ways, it concentrates the remaining tasks on the hardest cognitive problems that require strategic decision-making, informed in a much more data-rich way, so we can make great choices. Next two slides, actually, we'll kind of go through the manufacture side and then the deliver logistics side on a few recommendations that we have for clients and companies in the sector that are thinking about what should they do. Adam?
Yeah. So this starts with the underlying technology layer, right? And to tie it back to what we were just talking about, at the end of the day, being able to drive accelerated decision making means having data available so that you can understand what's happening in real time. And in order to do that, you've got to have the ability to pull information from the multiple sources of data that exist within a manufacturing environment. And so we talk a lot about this idea of more seamless integration. And that could be integration between systems or integration between machines and systems. But at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is the same, which is to get access to information on a quicker time scale so that decisions can be made more effectively and they can be more informed and more accurate based on what's really happening in your production environment. The second thing that we really talk with companies about is really taking a step back and thinking about the broader manufacturing network. And this is extremely relevant in today's environment with what's happening in tariffs, what's happening. And again, I'm Boston based, so I spend the majority of my time in the US, but what's happening between Canada, between the US, between Mexico, with the flow of parts, raw materials and finished goods across borders is really thinking about, hey, what is being made where? Is this the right strategy going forward? Do we have the ability to be agile in terms of where do we have capacity, where are we tight on capacity, what's the role of our third-party manufacturing or our contract manufacturing environment, and really start to think about, is there a way that maybe I could do this in a more flexible manner than I've been doing it in the past? And I guess the last piece of this is, and that this ties back to what I was talking about with regards to people, is a lot of companies, it's easy for companies to think from a capital perspective, to think around equipment, right, or around technology, but it's harder to really think about how do I invest in my workforce, right? That's fuzzier. It's not as concrete, and so really thinking about and maybe taking your production leadership, partnering with your HR leadership, and thinking about, hey, what's going to happen to my culture as this transformation continues and as I get more digital density into my production environment? How is that going to affect my culture? How is that going to affect my people? What tools can I bring to the table so that I'm really kind of hitting on all legs of the stool and not just a couple of them?
Yeah, appreciate that. Nicole, your thoughts on the same question on the deliver logistics side?
Yeah, as I think about this, I broke it down really into 3 different categories, and that's focusing on how do you become resilient to all the things we've talked about today. How do you maintain scalability while becoming resilient? And then how do you think about sustainability for the future as well? And so just highlighting something from each of those sections. One thing I see happening in the supply chain mode of thinking is the shift from just in time to just in case. And we see this time and time again, where companies who are prepared to rapidly respond to changes in demand are the ones who succeed long term. And a good example of this was in the beer industry, where Anheuser-Busch faced a large social media backlash a little over a year ago today, and their demand quickly shifted. And we saw brands like Constellation or Molson Coors were able to react very quickly and capture that share. And in some instances, they've been able to retain that share over a year later. And so their ability to react quickly to an unforeseen change, right, not even one of the disruptors that we've talked about today, was a success path for them long term to achieve share in a very difficult marketplace. So as you think about how to maybe structure your business around a just-in-case model, it doesn't mean that you have to have more inventory at every single one of your distribution centers, for example, but it could mean strategically placing backup inventory at one centralized distribution center in a place such as Chicago or Memphis, where you can access most of the US within a 1 or 2 day transit, or by having something like an air freight provider relationship with which you can overnight a critical repair part if you're on the manufacturing side of the equation. And so those are things that we're seeing a shift from how do I hold as a little inventory just-in-time model to how do I hold not only that just-in-time model, but some of that just-in-case inventory as well. And that is making folks more resilient to those disruptions. And then second, on the scalability piece, planning for large-scale growth isn't just important on the manufacturing side, as Adam's highlighted a few times, but it's also important downstream, planning on how do we get those growth products to market. We often focus on, I just installed a new line for my production. How do I get that installation to go on time? Do I have the demand for more products in this marketplace? And we forget to spend a lot of effort on, do I have the right distribution network to quickly get those products to market once we're able to produce them? And so this is where I'll take the opportunity to shamelessly plug having a third-party logistics provider involved in your business. A 3PL can essentially scale for you, and a good 3PL has the ability to do so with a presence around the country where they're pre-investing in the valuable space that you need when it's urgent, and then planning ahead to scale with you when you have more time to do so. By using a 3PL, you can test new markets with smaller footprints and then grow into them over time or as quickly as you need it, versus having to make all of those investments directly yourself. And then finally, as I mentioned, I'm a recovering railroader. And so one of the elements that comes to the forefront when I think about sustainability is the usage of rail, either through carload rail or intermodal. And rail is really the most sustainable way for most of us to get our products to move around the country, often up to 4 times or more fuel efficient than truck. And so planning your supply chain to include rail and other sustainable practices takes work and often takes adjustments upstream all the way to the production side of the equation, including your inventory planning practices. And that further just ties back into the interconnectedness of the two halves of the supply chain that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, recovering railroader. I like that term. I don't think you ever fully get out, Nicole. I've had one of my clients. The product has to be designed right or be suited for rail, but it's tremendous, and I always forget how much more carbon efficient it is. And another sort of unrecognized advantage of rail is the fact that it is inventory storage on the road or on rail, that is. And I've had some clients sort of like lower their overall inventory storage capacity, putting their goods in movement, which I thought was sort of a good strategy. You have to have all of the predecessor things that we talked about to make that work, but certainly quite interesting topic. We want to make sure we get to Q&A. So if you haven't put questions in the chat and you have them, please load them in. Mary's going to voice a few questions here for us in just a second. I'll briefly summarize a bit of kind of where we're landing on all of this. Hopefully you've seen the intersection between these two. You live it every day. This is your world, and so hopefully some of these perspectives give you one or two interesting things to think about. On the make side, as you think about digitization, optimization, and upskilling. On the deliver side, around diversification of networks and resilience, route visibility, and scenario planning, especially around unplanned for, unexpected disruptions. And at the core, in between the two, strategies first around data and getting data right, moving what is a physical world into a digital world to allow us to exponentially lean into that with AI tools and other things. Operations that are agile and flex, that requires the standard processes that Adam described, with the flexibility inside those processes to react to the world around it. And of course, workforce, which even in an explosive AI environment is a fundamental differentiator for companies as they lean into talent. The talent profile for what we all need in our companies is shifting. And in a lot of ways is moving to more exciting work as some of the sort of more mechanical activities we can automate and go from here. Mary, what questions do we have? Things that have come in for this group that we should spend the last few minutes on here?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys. Again, as Jonathan mentioned, if you do have any last questions, go ahead and toss them into the Q&A box. But before we get to all of those, we'll just start with one that's come in. So this is an audience question, and I guess it could kind of go for all of you, but I guess Adam, we'll start with you. How have recent AI developments simplified the data lake aggregation from all the different sources for querying? In the past, data collection, harmonization, cleansing, structuring, and maintenance was often too daunting. Is that easier now?
It's definitely becoming easier. And again, guys, I'm going to kind of talk about this from a manufacturing bias, since that's where I spend all of my time. But in the past, the majority of the manufacturing technology stack was stitched together using point-to-point integration solutions, right? So your ERP had a single connector to an MES system, which had a single connector to a LIMS quality system, which had a single connector to a warehouse management system, whatever it might be, right? We're starting to see that architecture be challenged by something that's called unified namespace architecture. And effectively what that is that's a publish subscribe model for data sources. And it allows you to, instead of being a hierarchical structure that sits on point-to-point integration, it's effectively kind of like a circular architecture that allows you to publish data or subscribe to data across a range of different applications or sources, including a data lake, for example. And what that's doing is that it's freeing up the ability for companies to think about what might happen in the future. Hey, I might need access to a third-party data source, or I might need access to this part of this selection of data that resides over here. And it's giving more flexibility and while maintaining kind of sources of truth in the systems that should be sources of truth. And so as a result, it's providing a platform for more advanced analytics capabilities to sit on top of that architecture. So it's definitely getting easier. Now, there's not a ton of companies that are moving into the unified namespace architecture, but it is where companies are going in terms of thinking about how do they stitch together these data sources so that they can take advantage of some of the capabilities that need to sit on top of them.
I think one other advantage of that, jump the gun there. I think one other advantage of what you were talking about, Adam, is really a challenge that people had before, which is, and still have to some extent, which is data lake governance, right? Or just data governance in general. And those changes that you mentioned on the architecture of how that data is getting aggregated have made it, I would say, easier and improved abilities to audit that data, have more trustworthy data within there. It's all coming from a single source instead of multiple connections, to your point. And that's made it more usable for enterprises to not only have to spend less time on master data management and data integrity, but also to be able to trust that data to just make decisions and use the output from that data lake or whatever that aggregating platform is.
For sure.
Jonathan, do you have anything you want to expand on this?
I think that's well said. I mean, maybe the only thing I'll sort of amplify here is that in yesterday's world, data had to be highly structured in tables that linked to other tables. And when that sat across multiple platforms, it was really, really challenging. And with a data lake aggregator and AI tools that can work much more meaningfully on unstructured data, the complexity of that infrastructure lowers a lot, and really allows companies to access embedded assets on unstructured data that was inaccessible before because they couldn't write the queries in the right way to get that information out. And so I think it's quite an exciting time where many of our clients are starting to tap into assets that have effectively sat latent because they were inaccessible in that they weren't structured the way that they needed to be.
And I feel like kind of getting that right structure is half the battle because you can only work with obviously the resources that you're given. Another question that we have, I think, Jonathan, we'll start with you this time. What kind of visibility tools or reporting do you provide that would kind of help customers detect issues early and make faster decisions during a disruption?
I'll kick that one to Nicole. Nicole, I think you've got some great visibility tools that I wouldn't want to overshadow here.
Yeah, I would say this goes back to a lot of those foundational principles that we talked about on one of the slides where we had future-proofing against foundation, and having some kind of transportation visibility tool is really, really critical. There's a number of different tools out there. I could make a list, whoever asked this question, if you want some recommendations, but there are a lot of tools out there that allow you to see with geofencing, GPS, those types of technologies, where your truck, your rail car, your intermodal container is in real time. Many of them are very precise, down to a matter of feet. And so that can be very, very helpful in understanding what of your loads, for example, are even impacted by that disruption, or what has maybe already moved through that space. If you're talking about an infrastructure impact or a weather impact. The other thing is, on the topic of integration, is making sure that your systems are integrated. So whether you're a logistics provider working with a manufacturer, if you're just talking internally within your own manufacturing systems and delivering systems, but being able to have that connected data, I think, is really, really critical, and is needs a place to do so. So whether that's some type of portal, whether that's some type of dashboard, being able to see those pieces and interlacing that forecast as well is really, really critical. So that for us is an internal portal where we're able to take in all of the inputs from our customer from a forecasting perspective. We're able to provide recommendations based on historical data that we may see from past years of shipping. And then we're able to use the human-powered element of it and provide insights based on maybe what other customers have done in similar situations or are doing in the exact same situation if they're both dealing with disruption as well. And so for us, that lives in a portal for our customers to be able to see not only those real-time loads, but also real-time inventory and that forecast overlaying, essentially that risk assessment with capacity, et cetera.
Adam, do you want to share any insights here?
I mean, no, I don't think so. There's a lot of different tools available to be able to do some of this stuff, and it often helps to get some coaching and advice on how to best take advantage of what's in the market today.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question. Though capital investments are available, are we a manufacturing economy versus service and technology? How would you characterize our present day manufacturing infrastructure, and how quickly are we able to pivot towards expanding manufacturing in general?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that one. I think if you it's kind of two questions, right? If you look at GDP, the United States is not a manufacturing economy any longer, right? It's a services and technology economy for sure. But on the flip side, what's happening right now in terms of our manufacturing infrastructure is very interesting, and it's very industry or sector specific in terms of the ability to pivot and the ability to increase capacity for certain goods. And so we're seeing a lot of movement in that space right now. We haven't seen a ton of either starts or stops, I'll put it that way, but there is a lot of work going on to think about, hey, should we be producing more? Where can we produce more? Can we take a different advantage of it? And that gets back to some of the trends that we've talked about in terms of agility, the use of partners. But again, it's very sector specific. How you pivot if you're making automotives is different than if you're making semiconductors, which is different than if you're in the plastics value chain. And so it's very sector specific.
Fantastic. Oh, fantastic. I think Jonathan has a few things that he needs to add before we're done today.
Well, just a thank you to you, Nicole, for sharing, and for Adam, your perspectives on manufacturing. For those that are watching or looking at the replay, if you prefer to read things in long form format, there's a few white papers written by G3 and one written by EY around navigating and both on the risk mitigation side and on the opportunity side that some of these disruptions create across the supply chain. There's lots of both risk and opportunity. Of course, if you'd like to reach any of us, Nicole, Adam, or myself, you can reach us on this email address here. And we really appreciate the conversation today. Thank you for joining us.
Excellent. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you to our audience for taking the time to listen in. And a big thank you to Nicole, Jonathan, and Adam for sharing your insights with us today. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be sent to everyone tomorrow via the email you used to register with. We hope you join us again next time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.